Narcissists will dump as much shame onto you as you will carry. In today's video, I'm going to tell a couple different stories about the sneaky ways in which they can do this to the people in their lives, in the hopes that if this is happening to you, you may be able to see yourself in these stories and you may be able to stop carrying the shame that doesn't belong to you. Welcome to Looking Behind the Mirror, where we explore narcissism and take our lives back as we make sense out of nonsense. As a quick disclaimer, everything I say is based on my opinions and my personal experiences. I'm not a professional, and if you're really struggling, I encourage you to seek professional help. I am providing links below for you. I'm going to do this a little differently than I normally do. I'm going to tell a bit of a long story. But this story is one that actually inspired this whole video as I was thinking about it. This is a story that happened in real life, but I am going to change some of the details and names just so it's not obvious who I'm talking about. And maybe this is actually a story about you. My hopes are if this is something that you can relate to, this can help you find your way out of these emotional traps that narcissists can put us in. So this is a story about a married couple, and I'm going to call them Steve and Susan. Now, Steve and Susan met each other when Susan was in a pretty vulnerable time in her life, and Steve was a lot older than her, and Susan thought when they met that Steve was the answers to all of her hopes and dreams. Of course, that's how it started. And, they ended up together and they eventually got married. And long story short, after about 7 or 8 years of being together, problems started to come up in the relationship. Now, through the history of this relationship, really from the very beginning, Steve was really taking advantage of Susan's expectations and naivety and lack of self-confidence. Steven has really spent the entire relationship gaslighting her, convincing her that nothing she does is ever enough, that all the problems in the relationship are her fault, that nothing she does is ever good enough, and that she's lazy. And Steven also has always been suspicious of her. And this is something that's really evident in the relationship. He's always questioning her motives and her intentions, flat out telling her that he doesn't believe her when she says that she loves him. And Susan has really been in this perpetual trap of constantly feeling like she has to prove herself, prove her intentions, prove that she's trustworthy, because Steven has just never been able to trust her, and he's always somehow convinced her that that's her job. It's her job to convince him that he can trust her, when she's never given him any reason to think that he isn't able to trust her. And there's a lot of other stuff going on in this relationship. There's a very uneven power dynamic. Steven makes a lot more money than Susan does. He is quite misogynistic. He expects her to learn how to cook, and she does. She doesn't know how to cook when she meets him, and she learns how to cook just for him to make him happy. Of course, it's never quite enough. She's expected to be a homemaker and be a really great housekeeper, and nothing she does is ever quite good enough. Nothing's ever perfectly clean, yada, yada, yada. So over the years, Susan starts to fall out of love with Steve. She's not thrilled when he comes into the room because she's always afraid that he's going to find something he's not happy with, or that he's going to notice some obvious sign that she's not measuring up to his expectations. So, this tends to eat away at a relationship. And Steve has also really always minimized her. He's always played devil's advocate every time she has come to him with some complaint about somebody else or some situation she's in. Everything is always her fault. You get the picture. Anyway, so Susan starts falling out of love with him after a few years. And of course, Susan has taken all this shame onto herself over the years of this relationship. She feels like all of her shortcomings or all of Steve's disappointments are because she's not good enough. It's not because Steve has incredibly unrealistic expectations, completely unreasonable expectations, has extreme emotional problems that won't allow him to trust anybody, and has this incredibly insatiable need to control everything. So, I mean, Steve is basically, he's a narcissist, and he is a very covert, calculating, deliberate, in control, calm kind of narcissist. So he's actually been playing a lot of mind games with her. I could go on and on about these guys. Anyway, so Susan starts to not only absorb all the shame over the years that have been dumped on her, but now she's starting to feel ashamed of the fact that she doesn't really like Steve anymore, because Steve has given her so much. He has given her the life she always dreamed of. She should be so grateful to this guy. And she can't figure out why she really doesn't like being in the same room with him, why she feels so uncomfortable around him. Of course, I'm sure listening to this story, it's kind of obvious, right? But it wasn't obvious to Susan. It was just more for her to feel ashamed of. And now she's in this position where when she says, "I love you" to Steven, she actually kind of doesn't mean it anymore. And Steven's never believed her at any point, but now she really is lying to him when she says that. And now she's stuck in this place where she spent years trying to prove to him that she had good intentions and that she was being honest about her feelings and all this, but now she actually is lying. Steven has created this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and now she's stuck in this place where he was right. He was right about me all along. I really don't love him, but I do, but I should. But what's wrong with me? Okay. And these guys eventually end up in couples therapy, which is super helpful in this kind of situation. Not. Now, something happens in one of these couples therapy sessions that really kind of pierces through the fog in Susan's mind, just a little bit, but it's the first time that she ever really sees a glimpse of reason. So before I tell you what happened in this therapy session, let's just back up a few weeks. There is a family friend, and let's call him Dave, and he's a family friend of Steven's family, okay? And Steven has a sister, let's call her Cindy. So Dave, the family friend, he is very close with Cindy, and he's acquainted with Steven, okay? And he one day just happens to accidentally walk in on Susan, who is having an emotional breakdown, okay? Because Susan is really having a very difficult time dealing with her emotions. She feels extremely guilty about how badly she actually wants to leave Steven, and she's really an emotional wreck. She doesn't really have anyone to talk to about it because the outside world is looking in thinking that Steven is this really awesome guy that's done all this great stuff for her, and she's buying into that herself. So nobody's going to feel bad for her. Nobody's going to understand why she can't stand being in the same room with him anymore, right? But anyway, when she's alone, when she thinks she's alone, sometimes she has these emotional breakdowns where she's just sobbing uncontrollably. She's just beside herself with this pain and agony and guilt that she doesn't know what to do with. She doesn't see a way out. She doesn't know what to do. And Dave one day accidentally walks in on her while she's just sobbing uncontrollably, and he thinks, "Oh my gosh, Susan, are you okay?" And pats her on the back, and Susan doesn't know what to say. You know, she has to say something to him. So she doesn't give any details, and there are details to give, but she doesn't give any details. She just says something to the effect of, "Well, Steven and I are having some marital problems, and I'm having a really hard time." And Dave comforts her and gives the appropriate response, and he really does care. He feels bad about the pain that Susan apparently is in, quite a bit of pain. And that's kind of the end of that interaction, you know, and it was nice that Susan had somebody to talk to for at least a minute, right? Well, now Dave's a pretty decent guy. You know, he's a nice guy. He means well, but he has never been the kind of person that you would want to tell a secret to or trust a secret to. He's just not real great in that department. So let's fast forward to this couples therapy session that Steven and Susan are in. Somewhere in this therapy session, kind of out of the blue, Steven looks at Susan and says, "Did you tell Dave that we were having marital problems?" When Steven says this, it's terrifying. It strikes fear into Susan's heart. I mean, she's scared to death of what Steven is going to think about this, how he's going to react, all the suspicions and things that he might be thinking about her. Steven's made it very clear, I should say, he's made it very clear throughout the entire relationship that anything that happens within the relationship belongs in the relationship, and that she should never be telling anybody about any relationship problems that she's having, that they should only talk to each other. Of course, that's what he's made it clear, right? So for her to have said anything to Dave, even though Dave walked in on her crying, for her to have said anything to him is really a betrayal of this relationship, okay? And now Steven has just basically sucker punched her with this question, "Did you tell Dave about our marital problems?" And Susan, in a knee-jerk, terrified response, says, "No, I didn't tell him about our marital problems." And she's kind of thinking to herself, well, I didn't go into any details. I just said we were having problems. I mean, I didn't really sit and talk to him about the problems. And she's way too scared to admit that she did say something to him about the problems. And then Steven follows it up by saying, "Oh, really? Because Cindy told me that Dave told her that you did discuss our marital problems with him." Now remember, they're in the middle of a couples therapy session, and this is a really interesting moment in this whole experience that Susan is having. In the moment that Steven basically catches her in a lie, she's feeling an enormous amount of fear and shame. She feels shame for having never been good enough for Steven, always been a failure in everything that she's ever tried to do for him. Never been able to convince him of her intentions, of her love, of her trustworthiness, and then eventually became somebody that was lying about her feelings, way too scared to tell the truth about how she really felt, and feeling an enormous amount of shame and guilt for how her feelings have changed, feeling like something's wrong with her. This is completely her fault. She is the bad guy here because she should feel all warm and fuzzy about Steven. So something's wrong with her because she doesn't feel warm and fuzzy about Steven anymore. And now on top of that, she feels shame for having betrayed the relationship by telling Dave about their marital problems. And now on top of that, she's also a liar because she lied to Steven when he asked her if she told Dave about their problems. So Susan is sitting here in a shame spiral. She feels like the worst person on planet Earth. She's been exposed. She's terrified of how Steven's going to handle this. And she also feels like the therapist is obviously going to see what an awful, horrible human being she is. And in this moment, the therapist looks at Steve and says, "Did you just ask her a question that you already knew the answer to?" This might not seem like that profound of a question, but this question really was the first time that Susan has felt any type of validation in this relationship. This is the first time that Susan has had anyone present an idea that maybe she's not 100% to blame for everything. Maybe she's not 100% the bad guy. Maybe that was a pretty crappy trick for Steven to play on her, to set that kind of trap when he already knew the answer to that question. That was pretty mean. And while she still feels an enormous amount of guilt and shame for breathing, she realizes for the first time that maybe she's not the horrible monster that she has been convinced that she is. In reality, when we step back and look at the totality of this relationship, I'm sure many of us listening to this story can see that Susan really is an abuse victim, and it's not her fault if she started to lose feelings for somebody that treated her like she didn't matter. and that she was really put into an emotional trap that she couldn't find her way out of. And, you know, she shouldn't have lied, and she probably shouldn't have told Dave about their marital problems if that was an understanding between the two of them, between Stephen and Susan. But she's an emotional wreck for a reason. And when Dave walks in on her crying and sobbing uncontrollably, she didn't mean for that to happen, and it's pretty reasonable to explain to somebody why you're crying, at least to give a hint of a reason of why you're crying and sobbing uncontrollably. So she really didn't do anything awful, and she lied and said no to Stephen because she was terrified of how he would react if he knew that she had told Dave about their problems. And whose fault is that? A healthy relationship with somebody that really cares about you is never going to leave you feeling terrified to talk to them about things that are actually happening. If Steve actually cared about this relationship and wanted a healthy relationship, he would have said something to her like, Cindy told me that Dave told her that you talked to Dave about us having marital problems. Let's talk about that. I don't like that you talked to Dave about our problems. And he wouldn't have presented it backwards in order to trap Susan and create more shame for her, because Stephen knew perfectly well that Susan was terrified of him. So of course he knew that there was a good chance she was going to lie. And for Stephen, that creates an opportunity to control her more, to pour more shame on top of her, and to convince her further that she's the bad guy here, and that she doesn't have a right to leave him, and she doesn't have a right to feel any kind of judgment towards him. So Stephen really illustrated here that he's interested in control and in intimidation and in shaming his partner in order to control the relationship and to manipulate Susan into doing and being and trying as much as she can. And this therapy session is the first little glint of light where Susan sees that maybe she's feeling a lot more shame than she should. Maybe Stephen is responsible for some of the problems here. If anybody can really relate to this story, I don't think that you should feel ashamed of yourself for being a human being, for feeling what you feel. Nobody should ever feel ashamed of their feelings, and nobody should ever feel like their feelings are a crime. Somebody that loves you and cares about you will give you space and allow you to be honest about your feelings, will allow you to discuss how you feel, even if your feelings may be threatening to them. Somebody that's in a healthy relationship with you won't leave you feeling terrified that your partner is going to find out how you feel about things, and won't leave you feeling ashamed of who you are when you've really spent years pouring everything you have into this relationship trying to make this other person happy. If you've spent years pouring your time and energy into a relationship, you shouldn't walk away from it feeling ashamed of yourself. And in this story I've told, in reality, Susan was always set up for failure because Stephen never wanted her to meet his expectations. He never wanted her to be a good enough cook or housekeeper. He reveled in her failures, and he reveled in the opportunities she gave him to shame her, to criticize her, to make her feel like she wasn't good enough, because that is what gave him control of the relationship and control over Susan. And just in case anybody's wondering, Susan, pardon my language, Susan dumped his ass flat on the ground eventually. So let's talk a little bit more about shame and how narcissists use this to control people. And I do have one more short story that I can share. But I want to explain that shame is a weapon that narcissists can use to control people. When a narcissist can convince you to be ashamed of yourself, to be ashamed of your feelings, to be ashamed of who you are, then a narcissist can not only control you, but a narcissist can make you feel indebted to them, because they're still with you, putting up with you, right? And if a narcissist successfully makes you feel ashamed, then a narcissist can keep you trying to earn your way out of that shame, trying to be good enough and feeling like you owe something to this person that's putting up with you and maybe even giving you things, providing you things, you feel like, wow, I'm such a horrible piece of crap, but this person's still with me, putting up with me, giving me whatever it is they're giving me. I really owe them big time. Narcissists like to really shove you down into a hole and then make you feel ashamed of yourself for trying to climb out of that hole. And one more quick story. This one's going to be about a couple. Let's call them Jack and Lisa. Okay, now Jack is not quite the same kind of person as Steven was. They're both narcissists, but Jack is more of a raging lunatic. Okay, he's like a 5-year-old with a blindfold on in a room with a machine gun that just has no control over his temper whatsoever, where Steven was a more calm, calculated, manipulative, deliberate kind of person. Okay, now, and this is a much shorter, it's not even really a story, it's an example. Let's say Jack is really into jet skiing. He just loves jet skiing. He's got a passion for it, and when it is jet skiing season, he is out there at least once a week jet skiing. Okay, and Lisa meets Jack, falls in love with Jack, and she gets into jet skiing as well. And she probably would have never jet skied if she hadn't have met Jack, but because it's something Jack loves, she gets into it too. And it kind of becomes part of her identity as well. And she really loves it because it's something she can do with Jack, and she sees it as a bonding experience, and, you know, she really gets into it herself. But over the years, you know, Jack becomes super critical of her. He's constantly criticizing her technique. He's just constantly down her throat, telling her that she's not doing it right, she's not trying hard enough. And, you know, it gets to a point where Lisa feels like, why am I even doing this? I thought that this was supposed to be an activity we could enjoy together. And man, now when I do it, all I can think about is, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? You know, he's going to yell at me for hours about how I don't try hard enough and I'm not doing it right, and I'm holding him back, and he can't go do I don't know anything about jet skiing, but, you know, he can't go to the dangerous hot spots for jet skiing because she can't do it. I don't know. Anyway, as this relationship falls apart, Jack one day says to Lisa, I bet you only jet ski because I like to jet ski. And Lisa has really been carrying a lot of shame for not jet skiing good enough, not trying hard enough, not doing it fast enough, or whatever. And I know this kind of seems silly, but this is based on a true story that really happened. It wasn't jet skiing, but it was something similar. And now she's stuck in this corner where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, yeah, I got into jet skiing because you liked it. And, you know, Lisa thought that Jack might appreciate that. But, you know, narcissists don't ever appreciate anything. And now he's turning it around on her like it's a crime and it's something she should be ashamed of, that she's kind of like faked her way into this and pretended that she likes to jet ski just to impress Jack, when really it was something that she got into because she thought it might be a good bonding activity. So you see how narcissists can really shove you into these damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenarios. And narcissists can also do this in situations where you finally decide to say something. In a normal, healthy relationship, if something's bothering you or making you uncomfortable, you should be able to say something to your partner to let them know, hey, it really makes me uncomfortable when you do X, Y, or Z, or it really bothers me. Can we work this out somehow? With a narcissist, you always kind of feel like you're not really allowed to do that. You kind of know that instinctively. I'm not allowed to complain. I'm not allowed to voice my concerns or say when something's bugging me or something's hurting my feelings, because anytime you do, you're immediately shamed for having any kind of criticism for your partner. It's turned around on you immediately. If you say something like, you know, it really makes me uncomfortable when you criticize me in front of your mother, it can be turned around into anything that the narcissist can think of off the top of his or her head. Maybe something like, oh, I thought that I should be able to talk about something that's bothering me. So you want me just to keep things to myself if something's bothering me then, you know, or just anything. Turned around to make you the bad guy, and also to teach you that you're not allowed to speak up when something's bothering you, and that if something's bothering you, it's going to immediately be turned around into something that you should be ashamed of. And this video is getting pretty long, but I also wanted to include the example from the movie The Shining, the original Stanley Kubrick version of The Shining. And if you haven't seen that movie yet, I'm gonna, like, there's some major spoilers probably here I'm about to say, and like, go watch that movie. That movie's one of the best illustrations of a narcissistic person that I think I've ever seen in a movie, in my opinion. Anyway, there's this scene where in this, and if you don't know the premise of the movie, they are in this great big snowbound hotel and it's a family of 3. It's Jack, Wendy, and their little boy. And they're in this snowbound hotel that it's their job to look after over the winter. Okay, and it's a huge hotel. Jack is a writer, and he's in this huge lobby type room typing. He's writing. And Wendy walks in on him. And this is a scene that I would call, let me explain something to you. So if you want to see the scene, just go to YouTube and type in Wendy, let me explain something to you from The Shining, and I'm sure it'll pop up. It's a really iconic scene where Wendy walks in and tries to make small talk with Jack because she's lonely and she wants to talk to him, and you can tell that she's a little nervous around him, and she's talking about making lunch for him, and he starts really ripping into her for interrupting him. And it starts with, let me explain something to you, and you just got to go see it. He's really mean to her. And then, you know, she kind of leaves with her tail between her legs. And I think it's an interesting scene in the movie because he's basically shaming her for interrupting him while he's trying to write, while he's trying to work. And he's making her feel ashamed of herself. And in reality, when you look at the big picture, Jack is the one that is responsible for maintaining this hotel. And you can see in the movie that Wendy is actually doing his job for him. So he's the one that should really be ashamed of himself for not doing his job and pawning it off on his wife. On top of that, you find out later that Jack's not really writing anything at all. He's really just kind of losing his mind. So he's really a failing writer. So he's failing at his actual job, and he's failing at the job that he wants to do at writing. And he's probably feeling a lot of shame for what a failure he actually is. And when Wendy comes in, he immediately finds a way to transfer his shame onto her, to make her feel ashamed for interrupting him while he's working so hard. And I think it's a really interesting scene where you can see the way that a narcissist transfers shame, where a narcissist makes their victims feel like they're the ones that are doing something wrong, while narcissists really are the ones that are ashamed of themselves and don't know how to handle this. Narcissists transfer their shame onto anyone around them that will accept it, and they can come up with all kinds of creative, manipulative ways to do this. And unfortunately, many of us fall for this. Many of us fall for sometimes they're very advanced techniques. And I hope that if you're watching this video, if this is happening to you, that you're able to kind of see yourself in some of these situations and realize that there's really nothing for you to be ashamed of. In reality, there's nothing for a narcissist to be ashamed of originally until they start doing these kinds of things to other people, which is kind of ironic. But it's important to realize if you're stuck in this kind of shame spiral that none of this originated from you, if this is something coming from a toxic partner. Narcissists have so much shame within them, so much pathological, toxic shame. They don't know what else to do with it. And they really feel like that if they can just dump it onto you, that somehow that will alleviate their own shame, but it never actually does. Narcissists are endless fountains of need that will never be filled, and they don't care how much they have to hurt other people and dump their toxic shame and pain onto others. None of it ever really makes them feel any better, and none of it really belongs to the people that they do this to. Narcissists mask their own sense of shame by trying to convince you to carry it for them, and I hope that that's something that you realize you never had to do in the first place. If you're looking for a way to support my channel and you've been considering professional therapy, BetterHelp is offering 10% off of your first month of service if you sign up using the link below in my description. And if you sign up using the link below in my description, I'll get a one-time commission. So that'll help me out, and it'll help you out as well if that's something that you've been thinking of doing. I hope this helps. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and comment below any ideas you have for me for future videos. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like this video and would like to see more like it in the future. Until next time, thanks. Bye.